Sometimes, the smallest phone call becomes the biggest miracle. The rain had already washed most of the evening traffic into a blur of red taillights and silver reflections when Nathan Whitmore stepped out of the grand ballroom, his polished dress shoes touching the wet sidewalk for the first time that night. Inside, people were still applauding another generous donation announced in his name, another smiling photograph destined for tomorrow morning's business pages, another celebration of a millionaire who seemed to have everything. Outside, the applause disappeared beneath the quiet rhythm of falling rain, and the silence felt far more honest. His driver opened the rear door of the black SUV, but Nathan lifted a hand and shook his head. "I'll walk," he said softly. It wasn't something he usually did. His calendar was organized to the minute, his routes planned by assistants, his evenings measured by meetings, contracts, and obligations. Yet something about this cold October night in downtown Boston made him crave a few blocks with no conversations, no cameras, and no expectations. Streetlights shimmered across puddles like scattered stars, and the chilly air carried the scent of rain-soaked brick and fresh coffee drifting from cafes preparing to close. Couples hurried beneath shared umbrellas. Friends laughed as they crossed intersections. Families disappeared into warmly lit apartment buildings where someone was almost certainly waiting behind every door. Nathan watched them without envy anymore. Loneliness had stopped hurting years ago. It had simply become familiar, like an old coat he forgot he was wearing. He adjusted the collar of his charcoal overcoat and continued walking until a sound almost too small to notice slipped through the rain. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet sound of someone trying very hard not to cry. Most people walked past without slowing. A delivery cyclist glanced over his shoulder before continuing down the street. 2 college students hurried by, their conversation never interrupted. Even a passing taxi splashed through the curbside puddle without pausing. Nathan nearly did the same. Then he saw her. A little girl, no older than 7, stood beneath the narrow awning of a closed neighborhood pharmacy. Her blonde curls clung to her cheeks from the rain, and both hands gripped a damp brown paper bag as though it contained something precious enough to protect with her whole body. She wasn't asking anyone for money. She wasn't chasing strangers or waving for attention. She simply held out a wrinkled piece of paper every time someone passed, only to lower it again when they kept walking. Nathan slowed. Something about the way she stood, trying to be brave while quietly falling apart, made the city around him seem strangely distant. He watched as she looked down at the paper once more, wiped her eyes with the sleeve of an oversized sweater, and whispered to another stranger who never even turned around. Finally, Nathan stepped closer, careful not to frighten her. The little girl looked up with tired blue eyes that carried far more worry than any child should ever know. She unfolded the damp paper with trembling fingers and held it toward him. Written across it in faded blue ink was a single phone number. Her voice barely rose above the rain. "Sir, would you please call my mommy? She always answers, but tonight she won't answer me." Nathan stared at the number, then back into the little girl's hopeful face. He reached into his coat pocket, wrapped his fingers around his phone, and without realizing it, felt something inside his carefully guarded heart begin to wake for the very first time in years. Nathan looked at the rain-speckled screen of his phone for only a second before pressing the number. Lily stood so close that he could hear her uneven breathing, both of her small hands still wrapped around the soaked paper bag pressed against her chest. The line rang once. Twice. 3 times. Each unanswered tone seemed to drain another little piece of hope from the girl's face. Nathan was about to end the call when a faint click finally broke the silence. At first, there was nothing except slow breathing, so quiet that he wondered if the connection had failed. Then a weak voice drifted through the speaker. "Lily," it whispered. Relief rushed across the little girl's face so suddenly that tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Mommy," she cried softly. "I found someone. I told you I would find someone." The woman on the other end struggled to finish each sentence. Sweetheart, are you safe? Lily nodded instinctively before remembering her mother could not see her. Yes. A nice man is helping me. Nathan listened without interrupting. The conversation lasted less than a minute, yet every word carried the weight of days filled with worry. Finally the woman spoke again, her voice fading almost to a whisper. Please, bring her home. Then the line went silent. Nathan lowered the phone slowly. He had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions with less emotion than he felt in that single moment. He crouched until he was eye level with Lily. Can you show me where you live? She nodded immediately and reached into the paper bag. Nathan expected to see candy or groceries. Instead he found a small bottle of cough medicine, a bruised red apple, and a folded pharmacy receipt that had been stamped but not fully paid. The little girl noticed him looking. The pharmacist said we could pay the rest later, she explained. Mommy keeps saying she will feel better tomorrow. Nathan swallowed quietly. He recognized the familiar determination in her voice. It was the kind people used when hope was all they had left. Outside the pharmacy, his driver had finally caught up after searching the block. Sir, everyone has been looking for you, the older man said, holding an umbrella over Nathan's shoulder. The board members are waiting for your call. Nathan barely looked up. Tell them it will have to wait. The driver blinked in surprise. That answer almost never came from Nathan Whitmore. Nathan stood and offered his hand to Lily. She hesitated only a second before slipping her tiny fingers into his. They felt cold despite the sweater she wore. As they walked toward the waiting sport utility vehicle, she glanced up at him. Are you really coming? She asked. Most people say they will help, but then they remember they are busy. Nathan looked down at her, hearing something in that simple sentence that hurt more than any accusation ever could. Tonight, he answered gently, I am exactly where I need to be. Lily gave the smallest smile, one that appeared almost by accident. As the warm air filled the vehicle, she carefully placed the paper bag on her lap as though every item inside mattered. Nathan quietly removed the navy scarf from around his own neck and wrapped it over her shoulders. She looked at the soft wool for a long moment before whispering, Mommy says blue means people can always find their way home. Nathan did not answer right away. Instead, he looked through the rain-covered window as the city lights drifted past, wondering why a little girl who had so little still believed so completely that someone would come when she needed them most. The drive lasted less than 15 minutes, yet to Nathan it felt like crossing an invisible bridge between two completely different worlds. Downtown skyscrapers slowly disappeared behind them, replaced by older brick buildings whose windows glowed softly against the rainy night. Lily sat quietly beside him, both hands folded around the navy scarf resting on her lap. Every few moments she glanced toward the windshield, silently counting familiar streets as if she were afraid they might somehow lose their way. Turn left at the next light, she whispered politely. Then it is the building with the green mailbox. Nathan nodded without taking his eyes off the road ahead. His driver followed the directions exactly until they stopped in front of a narrow 3-story apartment building tucked between a laundromat and a neighborhood bakery that had already closed for the evening. The paint around the entrance had faded with time, and the porch light flickered gently against the falling rain. Lily was already reaching for the door handle before the vehicle came to a complete stop. Nathan stepped out first and opened an umbrella above her. Together they climbed the worn wooden stairs to the second floor. She stopped outside apartment 2B, took a deep breath, and knocked twice. There was no answer. She knocked again, a little louder this time. Mommy, she called gently. I am home. Silence settled over the hallway. Nathan noticed Lily's hopeful expression slowly begin to fade, but before worry could overwhelm her, he gently tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. Grace, he called respectfully from the doorway. My name is Nathan. Lily asked me to bring her home. A soft voice answered from somewhere inside. Come in. The apartment was small but carefully cared for. Everything had its place despite how little there was. A worn sofa faced a tiny bookshelf filled with library books. Children's drawings decorated one wall with colorful tape instead of expensive frames. A kettle rested on the stove beside a chipped blue mug. It was not wealth that filled the room. It was quiet dignity. Grace Harper lay beneath a neatly folded blanket on the sofa, her face pale with exhaustion but her eyes immediately searching for her daughter. The moment Lily ran to her side, Grace smiled with unmistakable relief. "You made it home," she whispered as she gently brushed damp strands of hair away from Lily's forehead. "I told you I would," Lily answered proudly. "A nice man helped me." Nathan remained near the doorway, suddenly feeling like an unexpected guest inside a family's private struggle. Grace looked toward him with tired eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "Most people do not stop anymore." Nathan offered a small smile. She was very brave. While Lily carefully unpacked the medicine and apple from the paper bag, Nathan's eyes wandered across the apartment. That was when he noticed a drawing taped above the bookshelf. It showed a small white house beneath a bright blue sky. 3 large windows glowed with yellow light, and beside the house stood 3 smiling stick figures holding hands. At the bottom, written in careful block letters, were the words, "Home is where nobody gets left behind." Nathan found himself staring at the drawing longer than he intended. Grace noticed his attention and smiled faintly. "She made that for me last winter," she explained. "She says every family needs enough light for someone to find their way back." Nathan looked once more at the 3 bright windows before quietly realizing that perhaps the little girl sitting beside her mother had been waiting for someone long before she had ever stood outside that pharmacy asking a stranger to make one simple phone call. For a long moment, no one spoke. Rain tapped gently against the apartment window while the old kettle on the stove released a quiet ribbon of steam. Nathan realized he could not remember the last time silence had felt this peaceful. It was different from the empty silence waiting inside his penthouse every evening. This room was filled with concern, love, and quiet determination. Grace slowly sat up, apologizing almost immediately. "I am sorry you had to see us like this," she said with an embarrassed smile. "I was only trying to make it through the week until my next paycheck." Nathan looked around again. There were no signs of carelessness, only signs of sacrifice. The library books were neatly stacked. Lily's school backpack rested beside a tiny kitchen table with her homework carefully finished. Every light that was not needed had been turned off to save electricity. This was not a family that had given up. It was a family doing everything possible to stay afloat. Lily reached into the paper bag and proudly handed the bottle of medicine to her mother. "I remembered exactly what the pharmacist told me," she said. "I even counted the blocks so I would not get lost." Grace kissed the top of her daughter's head. "You should never have had to do that alone." Nathan felt a heaviness settle inside his chest. Children should have been thinking about school projects, birthday parties, and playground games, not memorizing directions to pharmacies during cold October nights. He quietly took out his phone and stepped into the hallway. His driver waited near the stairwell. "Call the concierge physician we use for the company," Nathan said. "Ask if he can come here tonight." The driver hesitated. "Sir, it is nearly 10 o'clock. Nathan met his eyes calmly. "That is why I am asking now." Less than 30 minutes later, a physician carrying a small medical bag climbed the apartment stairs. He examined Grace carefully, spoke with reassuring patience, and explained that she needed proper treatment, rest, and a full medical evaluation at the hospital the following morning. Nothing in his voice suggested panic, only concern and optimism. Grace looked worried. "I cannot afford another hospital bill," she admitted quietly. Nathan answered before the doctor could respond. "Please allow me to take care of it." She immediately shook her head. "I cannot accept something that large from a stranger." Nathan smiled gently. You already trusted a stranger with your daughter tonight. Let me earn the rest of that trust. Grace lowered her eyes, uncertain. Lily looked back and forth between them before walking over to Nathan. She carefully held the navy scarf against her chest and asked the question that neither adult expected. If someone helps you when you're scared, are they still a stranger tomorrow? The room became completely still. Even the doctor stopped writing his notes. Nathan looked into the little girl's bright blue eyes and found no calculation there, only simple honesty. He slowly knelt beside her. I do not think so, he answered. Lily smiled with quiet satisfaction, as though the answer confirmed something she had believed all along. She reached over and gently took Nathan's hand. Her fingers were no longer trembling. Grace watched the moment unfold with tears gathering in her tired eyes, and for the first time that evening, the little apartment seemed warmer than any luxury home Nathan had ever owned. Somewhere deep inside him, a wall he had spent years carefully building began to crack, not with noise or drama, but with the gentle certainty that sometimes the most important family in your life is the one you never expected to find. The following morning arrived with clear skies, but Nathan could not shake the feeling that the previous night had changed something far beyond his carefully planned schedule. Instead of heading directly to the office, he met Grace and Lily outside the apartment building just after sunrise. Lily wore the navy scarf neatly wrapped around her neck, refusing to give it back despite offering several times. Nathan smiled each time and told her she could keep it until she no longer needed it. She accepted that answer with the seriousness only a child could give to an important promise. During the drive to the hospital, Lily sat quietly beside her mother, occasionally pointing out familiar landmarks through the window. Grace apologized more than once for disrupting Nathan's day, but every apology was met with the same calm reply. There is nowhere more important for me to be. Those words surprised even Nathan himself. A few days earlier, he would never have believed them. The hospital staff welcomed Grace with kindness, and because Nathan had arranged everything before they arrived, the paperwork moved quickly. While Grace met with physicians for additional tests, Lily waited in the family lounge with Nathan. She carefully colored pictures using a small box of crayons someone had left on a nearby table. Nathan watched as she drew another little white house with 3 bright windows. This time, however, she added a 4th figure standing beside the family. He noticed it without saying anything. After several quiet minutes, Lily looked up from the drawing. Do you know why I always make 3 windows? She asked. Nathan shook his head gently. Tell me. She smiled as she continued coloring the roof bright red. Mommy says 1 window is for today, 1 is for tomorrow, and 1 is for hope. Even when everything feels dark, hope leaves a light on. Nathan felt those simple words settle deep inside him. Hope leaves a light on. It sounded like something his own mother might have said years ago before illness had taken her far too soon. Memories he had locked away for decades returned unexpectedly. He remembered sitting beside her hospital bed as a young man, promising he would build a life so successful that she would never have to worry again. He had kept half of that promise. He had built success beyond imagination. Yet somewhere along the way, he had forgotten why he started. Success had become the destination instead of the tool. A nurse approached them carrying a folder. Mr. Whitmore, Grace asked if you could come to her room. Nathan stood immediately. Grace looked stronger than the night before, though still tired. She smiled gratefully. The doctors believe I will recover with proper treatment and rest. Nathan quietly nodded, relieved. Then Grace reached into the bedside drawer and removed a folded envelope. Before my husband passed away several years ago, he always told me that good people still existed, even when life became difficult. Last night, I finally understood what he meant. Nathan accepted the envelope politely, expecting perhaps a thank you note. Instead, inside was a single family photograph. Grace, Lily, and a smiling man stood together in front of the same little apartment building during happier times. Written across the back in careful handwriting were the words, "Home is never measured by its size. It is measured by the people who choose to stay." Nathan stared at those words for several long seconds. Outside the hospital window, morning sunlight poured across the city, and for the first time in many years, the future before him no longer looked like another endless calendar of meetings. It looked like an opportunity to become the man he had once promised his mother he would be. Over the next several days, Nathan found himself returning to the hospital more often than he returned to his own office. His executive assistant quietly rearranged meetings that had once seemed impossible to postpone, while board members exchanged puzzled looks every time he declined another dinner or investor event. For years, Nathan Whitmore had been known as the man who never missed an appointment. Now he was missing them on purpose. Every afternoon, he walked through the same hospital entrance carrying something simple. Sometimes it was a fresh bouquet of wildflowers for Grace. Sometimes it was a new library book that Lily had pointed to while they wandered through the gift shop. Once it was nothing more than 2 cups of hot chocolate because Lily had insisted that hospital hot chocolate tasted lonely. The nurses soon learned his name, not because of his wealth, but because he always stopped to thank each person who cared for Grace. One afternoon, Lily spread several sheets of construction paper across the small table beside the hospital window. Colored pencils rolled everywhere as she concentrated with complete seriousness. Nathan watched her quietly before asking, "What are you making today?" Without looking up, she answered, "A neighborhood." He smiled. "That sounds much bigger than a house." She nodded. "A house helps one family. A neighborhood helps lots of families." Nathan looked at the drawing. Small houses lined both sides of a tree-covered street. Every roof was a different color, but each home had the same 3 glowing windows. "Why do they all have 3 windows?" he asked. Lily shrugged as though the answer was obvious. "Because everybody needs hope. It should not only belong to us." Nathan felt the words linger in his mind long after she returned to coloring. Later that evening, while Grace rested peacefully, Nathan walked alone through one of the hospital corridors. He passed a community bulletin board covered with handwritten notices, local food drives, after-school programs, and free health clinics. One faded flyer caught his attention. It announced the closure of a neighborhood medical assistance hotline nearly a year earlier because funding had ended. Nathan stopped walking. Something about the logo at the bottom looked strangely familiar. He leaned closer. It belonged to the Whitmore Community Foundation, a charitable division of his own company. Confused, he photographed the flyer and immediately called his chief financial officer. "I need information about the neighborhood health hotline we discontinued last year," he said. There was a brief silence before the answer came. "Yes, sir. It was part of the annual budget reductions. Utilization numbers were lower than projected, so the program was eliminated. The decision was approved during the 4th quarter review." Nathan closed his eyes. He remembered signing dozens of budget documents that week without reading every page. One signature among hundreds. One routine decision buried beneath financial reports. "How much did the program cost?" he asked quietly. The amount was surprisingly small compared with the company's yearly revenue. Nathan looked back toward Grace's hospital room, where Lily's laughter drifted softly into the hallway. His heart sank as one painful thought settled into place. The number Lily had carried so carefully in her pocket had belonged to a support network that his own signature had helped erase. He had believed he was rescuing one frightened little girl on a rainy night. Instead, he realized he had unknowingly been part of the reason her family had been left to face so much alone. Standing beneath the bright hospital lights, Nathan made a silent promise to himself that this story would not end with regret. If one signature had closed a door, then another signature could open it again. The next morning, Nathan arrived at headquarters before sunrise, long before the elevators filled with executives carrying coffee and quarterly reports. The boardroom overlooking Boston Harbor looked exactly as it always had, polished glass, quiet confidence, and rows of leather chairs waiting for another meeting about numbers. Yet the man who walked inside was no longer thinking about numbers alone. He placed Lily's drawing of the little neighborhood with 3 glowing windows at the center of the conference table before anyone else arrived. When the directors entered one by one, they exchanged puzzled glances. They had expected another discussion about expansion, acquisitions, or profit forecasts. Instead, Nathan stood beside the window with unusual calm. "Before we begin," he said, "I need to tell you about a little girl who believed hope should belong to everyone." The room fell silent. He explained how he had met Lily outside the pharmacy, how Grace had struggled quietly, and how a community medical hotline had disappeared after a routine budget review. He never blamed anyone else. "The signature was mine," he admitted. "I approved it because I never stopped to ask what those numbers represented. I saw expenses. I did not see families." Several board members shifted uneasily. One director cleared his throat. "Nathan, restoring the program across the city will require a significant investment. Shareholders may question the decision." Nathan looked at the skyline stretching beyond the glass. "Then I will answer their questions myself." Another executive opened a spreadsheet filled with projections. "There are less expensive ways to improve public relations." Nathan slowly closed the laptop. "This is not about public relations. This is about responsibility." His voice remained gentle, yet every word carried unmistakable conviction. A business can celebrate record profits while still failing the people living 2 miles away. "I know because I almost became that kind of leader." No one interrupted him after that. Nathan pressed a small remote, and the presentation screen displayed a new proposal titled the 3 Windows Initiative. The program would restore the community medical hotline, provide emergency transportation for families without reliable access to care, partner with neighborhood pharmacies, and create a fund to ensure that no child would ever have to choose between walking home alone or finding help. The estimated cost filled the screen. It was substantial by ordinary standards, yet it represented only a small fraction of the company's annual earnings. Nathan signed the approval documents before anyone voted. "If necessary," he said quietly, "the first contribution will come from my personal account." The room remained still for several long seconds. Finally, the oldest member of the board removed his glasses and smiled. "I have served on this board for 22 years, he said. "Today is the first time I have seen us discuss people before percentages." One by one, the remaining directors reached for their pens. Every vote was unanimous. That afternoon, Nathan returned to the hospital carrying no flowers, no books, and no gifts. Instead, he carried a single folder. Lily looked up eagerly from the table where she was drawing another bright little house. "Did you have a meeting?" she asked. Nathan nodded with a smile. "Yes." "Did it go well?" she asked. He placed the folder gently beside her crayons. "You remember when you said every neighborhood deserves hope?" Lily smiled proudly. "I remember." Nathan looked at her drawing before answering. "Today, we left a light on for thousands of families who have never met you, but one day they will be grateful that a little girl believed there should always be another window glowing in the dark." The weeks that followed unfolded with a quiet rhythm that none of them had expected. Grace continued to regain her strength through treatment, proper rest, and the reassuring knowledge that she no longer had to face every challenge alone. Lily returned to school carrying the same bright curiosity she had always possessed, except now her smile appeared more often than her worried silence. Nathan still visited whenever his schedule allowed, although the word schedule had begun to mean something entirely different. He no longer measured successful days by contracts signed or meetings completed. Instead, he found himself remembering conversations, shared meals, and the sound of a little girl laughing over the smallest discoveries. One Saturday afternoon, after Grace had been discharged from the hospital, Nathan drove them to a neighborhood park overlooking the Charles River. Autumn leaves drifted across the walking paths while families filled the playground with cheerful voices. Lily ran ahead carrying a paper bag filled with birdseed, stopping every few feet to admire squirrels gathering acorns beneath the trees. Grace watched her daughter with grateful eyes before turning toward Nathan. "You gave her something I could not give her these past few months," she said softly. Nathan looked across the park where Lily was carefully sharing birdseed with two younger children she had never met. "I did not give her anything," he replied. "She reminded me of something I had forgotten." Grace smiled knowingly. "How to hope." Nathan shook his head gently. "How to notice." They sat together in comfortable silence until Lily came running back with another folded drawing tucked beneath her arm. "I finished it," she announced proudly. She spread the paper across the picnic table. Once again there was a neighborhood filled with colorful little houses, each one glowing with 3 bright windows. But this picture was different. Near the entrance to the neighborhood stood a small blue sign that read, "Welcome home." Nathan noticed something else as well. The fourth figure that Lily had begun adding to her drawings now carried a navy scarf around his neck. "Is that supposed to be me?" he asked with a smile. Lily nodded enthusiastically. "You forgot your scarf because I still have it." Nathan laughed quietly. "I suppose I did." Lily became serious for a moment. "I want to keep it until someone else needs it more than I do." Nathan felt his throat tighten. The scarf had started as nothing more than a simple way to keep a little girl warm on a rainy night. Now it had become something much larger, a promise passed from one caring heart to another. A few days later, the 3 Windows Initiative officially opened its first community support center inside a renovated neighborhood building only a few blocks from the pharmacy where Nathan had first met Lily. The restored medical hotline was operating again, volunteer coordinators answered every call with patience, and local clinics partnered with pharmacies to help families receive care before small problems became overwhelming burdens. Nathan attended the quiet opening ceremony without reporters or television cameras. He preferred it that way. As families entered the building throughout the morning, Lily stood beside the front door handing each child a small paper star she had cut out herself. "These are hope stars," she explained with complete sincerity. "You can put them in your window so people know the light is still on." Nathan watched the children smile as they accepted the tiny stars, and he realized that the greatest legacy a person could leave behind was never measured in buildings, wealth, or headlines. Sometimes it began with a frightened little girl carrying a damp paper bag, asking one stranger to make a single phone call, and it continued every time someone else chose to answer with kindness. Spring arrived quietly, almost as if the city itself had decided to breathe a little more gently. Cherry blossoms lined the sidewalks near the neighborhood support center, and children filled the nearby park with bicycles, laughter, and chalk drawings that stretched across the pavement. The 3 Windows Initiative had now been serving families for several months, and every week another story found its way back to Nathan's desk. A grandmother who finally received transportation to her medical appointments. A single father who found emergency childcare during a difficult week. A young mother who picked up medication without having to choose between groceries and her family's health. None of those stories appeared on the front page of a newspaper. Yet each one reminded Nathan that real success was often invisible to the world and unforgettable to the people who experienced it. Grace had returned to work part-time, stronger with each passing week, while Lily continued to visit the community center every Friday afternoon after school. She loved arranging books in the children's reading corner and greeting new families with the same bright smile that had once hidden so much worry. One Friday, she carefully removed the navy scarf from the hook where she had kept it since winter. She folded it neatly and carried it to Nathan. "I think I am ready now," she said. Nathan looked at the scarf for a moment before smiling. "Ready for what?" Lily pointed toward the entrance, where a little boy stood holding his father's hand, both of them looking uncertain as they stepped inside for the first time. "You told me I could keep it until someone else needed it more than I did," she said softly. "I think today is that day." Nathan watched as Lily walked over and gently placed the scarf around the little boy's shoulders. The child smiled with shy gratitude, and his father quietly thanked her without realizing the story woven into those simple threads of blue wool. Nathan felt his eyes fill with emotion, not because the scarf was leaving, but because its promise was continuing. Later that afternoon, Lily asked if they could visit the old pharmacy where they had first met. Together they stood beneath the same awning where rain had once fallen in endless sheets. The weather was warm now, and sunlight reflected from the windows instead of storm clouds. Lily reached into her backpack and unfolded one final drawing. It showed the familiar neighborhood with 3 glowing windows, but this time every house had an open front door. At the bottom she had written, "When someone answers, hope comes home." Nathan knelt beside her, carefully holding the picture in both hands. "Do you know," he said quietly, "I always believed the most important call I ever made would be to a client or an investor." Lily tilted her head. "What do you think now?" Nathan smiled toward the busy sidewalk where strangers passed one another, each carrying stories no one else could see. "Now I know the most important call I ever made was the one that reminded me how to listen." Grace joined them a moment later, placing a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. The 3 of them stood together for a while, watching the neighborhood move through another ordinary afternoon. There were no grand speeches, no flashing cameras, and no celebration beyond the quiet certainty that kindness had reached exactly where it was needed. Sometimes people spend their whole lives searching for purpose in distant places, only to discover it waiting on a rainy sidewalk beside a child who simply needed someone to stop, make one compassionate choice, and leave a light on for another family. Because true wealth is never measured by what we keep. It is measured by the hope we leave behind for someone else to find.